So we got Lerone Murphy and Movsar Evloev fighting this Saturday at UFC London. I'm going to break down this fight, give you my prediction, and what's next for the winner and the loser. But before I do that, please sub to the channel, drop a like, and I do appreciate you doing that. So before I break down this fight, I kind of want to talk about how we got here to this matchup. A little preview, since this is basically a title eliminator. You know, what's the title picture looking like going into this fight, because it is about to change. Everything you need to know going into this fight. So both of these two men arguably should have fought for the title already, but yet they find themselves here looking to finally solidify that title shot. Or at least that's what you would think, because in my mind, Gene Silva is right there with them. He's saying himself about how he's going to go to this event. He was personally invited by Hunter and Dana, and he's going to meet with the UFC and sign a contract for the next title fight with Volk. And he was so close to fighting Lerone this weekend on short notice too. Movsar was rumored and later confirmed himself in an interview with Mike Bond of MMA Junkie and on Full Send MMA that he almost didn't make this fight because of travel issues. It was rumored he hadn't received his passport, so had Gene Silva stepped in and gotten a win here, no doubt he's fighting Volk next. But depending on the performance from Movsar or Lerone this Saturday, Gene Silva could still be next for Volk, because I'm looking at Silva's last performance and thinking, can either Movsar or Lerone outperform that? I don't know. You know, the UFC, they might just do what the UFC does and book the more fan-appealing fight either way. You know, I would think they need a spectacular performance to get ahead of Silva, because it really does feel like Silva is probably the favorite to get that next title shot with the way the UFC has been operating. They probably need a finish win too, because you could have booked either of these two to fight Volk at 325. But instead, they gave it to the more fan-appealing fighter, Diego Lopez. So clearly, the UFC is like, you just need to show me more. I think that's definitely what's going on here with these two. You know, that's the one big issue with this fight. Movsar is known to be a born fighter, as well as Lerone. And Lerone, although can have some moments, you know, he had that big moment against Pico last year, he could still be known as a born fighter. And I'll touch on that in just a sec, but that's what has held these two back from a title shot thus far. And not only that, you know, they don't have any other way to draw buzz around them than to have moments in the cage. You know, both of these guys are humble. Both guys show respect and class. They don't sell fights by being a talker. I mean, this whole fight week, it seems so quiet. You know, I think Movsar has only done like 1 or 2 interviews this whole fight week. So with all that being said, I don't think the winner is guaranteed a title shot. I know they're both on long win streaks, both 9 fights in a row, but many forgettable fights among all those wins. And Movsar has had some separate issues, pulling out of fights and ultimately fighting once a year. So that's another layer to why he hasn't gotten that title shot. So why would the UFC trust him to show up when, again, he almost didn't show up for this one? But for Lerone Murphy, for the longest time, Lerone Murphy has been one of those fighters just out of the casual's eye because of where his fights have been, whether it was on the prelims or on fight nights at the Apex. It feels like it was only recently where he fought in bigger spots that people started to pay attention to his win streak and say, you know, what about this guy? You know, seems like he's doing enough. But during that short time, you had the sudden rise of Diego Lopez going out and becoming one of the biggest stars, having his big moments. And now you're looking like a boring fighter. So are these two actually that boring to watch? I think Movsar is actually not that boring if you're fine with grappling, his last 3 fights were actually good competitive fights. Aljo, Arnold Allen, Diego Lopez, and that speaks to his opponents, right? Like, if Movsar is dominating people on the ground because they can't do anything about it, how is that his fault? Why does he get trashed? So yeah, he could be boring to watch, depending if you like grappling or not, and depending on the opponent. So when Movsar is alleged to be sniffing crotches, that doesn't mean he isn't a good fighter. It doesn't mean he's completely one-dimensional. He's a good all-around fighter. His biggest strength is obviously the wrestling. Not many people will say that soon enough when talking about him. That's why nobody wants to fight him, because he's good everywhere. He doesn't make many mistakes. And once he gets you down, there's not much you can do about it. And Lerone isn't like Movsar. The thing with Lerone is he just doesn't have the power in his hands. Other than that, he can put up a good performance. Now, I wouldn't say he's a full-time performance of the night threat. Obviously not, but his skill set can get overlooked. He just hasn't had enough big moments. So while we're at that, let's go ahead and get into this fight. Like I said, both these guys are on long win streaks, and they're fighting at the highest level. When you break down both fighters and compare what they're missing, Movsar isn't missing much. But it's when you look at Lerone where you start to think, Movsar is going to sniff that crotch all day, possibly even ragdoll him. And that's a big possibility. Because it's not only when you highlight Movsar's strength in the wrestling, it's when you look at his boxing too. I'm not saying it's on the level of Lerone. Lerone has exceptional reaction time. He gets his timing off really good, but Movsar has good, clean boxing himself. Good and clean enough, in my mind, to hold his own long enough to eventually get a hold of Lerone. Disciplined enough to not get caught through a bad exchange. Because Lerone isn't this moment-seeking striker. And that's because he's very disciplined himself, right? So to me, Lerone's path to victory here is bringing the fight to Movsar, because point fighting Movsar, it's not going to work. Movsar has made a career off of point fighting, and Lerone has too, but Movsar is the better point fighter, if that makes sense. Because like I said, Movsar is the better all-around fighter, and I think in those point fighting chess matches, the better all-around fighter usually wins because they have more ability to take the fight anywhere. But of course, if Lerone is bringing the fight, he should be very wary of Movsar looking for an entry. I think Lerone should push a greater pace, but nothing crazy. It's just he can't sit there and wait for Movsar to make a mistake, because Movsar just doesn't make many of them. I don't think looking for that moment to piece up Movsar to come to him is going to pay off. I think he has to go out and get it. I would even say it's all worth it to try and get the finish if you're Lerone. But nonetheless, I don't see that happening. I think even though we all know Movsar is coming to wrestle, I still see Lerone getting wrestled nearly all the way through, if I'm being honest. Lerone's takedown defense looks atrocious when you think about Movsar and what Movsar can do to him. Lerone's takedown defense is only 50%. So how could I give any doubt this fight won't be a control-heavy win for Movsar? He's on a 9-fight win streak, and he didn't win those fights on the feet. So, like I said, the stand-up is clean enough to hold his own. That is part of those wins. But he's winning rounds by getting takedowns when it matters and controlling to steal some of those rounds away too. So once Lerone gets taken down, I don't have much faith that he's going to be able to make that adjustment and get out from Movsar's control. I think the only chance Lerone has here, realistically, is that Movsar has to know if he wrestles Lerone for 5 rounds, he's probably not getting that title shot. So if Movsar gets overzealous trying to create a finish opportunity himself, then Lerone can capitalize on that and maybe he does walk away with the title shot. It's just hard for me to see that happening since Movsar is, like I said, very disciplined and not known to make many mistakes. He isn't known to go for the finish either. He is purely a control fighter. That's how he gets his wins, without risk, no damage, just control. So I think he continue to win the way he has on Saturday by decision. But for either guy, let's say Lerone does win. Is Lerone getting the win at home in London, in the UK, the final piece to getting his title shot? I think he should be undeniable. That would be the final stamp because I really believe that with a win in London, that would really announce himself to this UK market as their guy. I think that was something he was missing, was the UK fan base to stand behind him and really support that opportunity that is a title shot. Without that, he's an incomplete star because he doesn't have the other makings of a star. He doesn't have the character traits of a talker, like I said before. So with a win, I think for sure a title shot is coming his way, especially if he does get that finish. But if he loses, I wouldn't take him too far out of the title picture. I just think he needs to come back to a more favorable matchup, someone who wants to strike but isn't a cleaner, better striker, maybe like an Arnold Allen, because Arnold isn't too far removed either. He's going to be looking for a bounce back win since he's coming off that loss to Gene Silva. So there's that. Is Movsar getting a title shot if he wins this Saturday? Well, it's a weird case with Movsar because, first of all, he's going to need a big moment. I think, yes, he's worthy of a title shot, even if he gets another decision win, even if it's a boring decision win. I do want to see Volk versus a wrestler like Movsar. I want to see something new for Volk, but do I want that over a Gene Silva matchup? Of course not. Gene Silva and Volk, that's another matchup where the more fan appealing fight is probably the better fight to watch, just like the Strickland and Chimaev fight. But just to stay on topic, Movsar, he also isn't a star. He's probably one of the most hated fighters on the roster. He gets shit on by the fans for his cancellations, the very suspect physique he has, and some other weird stuff that I won't get into. But yeah, I think he needs a big moment. Not just a dominant win where he racks up a ton of control time, but a finishing moment. He can't go out there and get 20 minutes of control time to a decision win and expect to get the title shot. He can expect to get passed up again if he does that. I'm sure he knows that. Now, second of all, win or lose, he has no finishes in the UFC. I won't be surprised that without a finish, the UFC is going to pass him up again because it's also the activity level too. He hasn't fought since 2024 and is still somehow the number one contender on the rankings. When I look at the rankings, he really shouldn't be the number one contender. I don't know why the UFC allows such inactive fighters to sit on a ranking as much as he has and keep it. Like I said, good fighter, does deserve a title shot, and some things are out of control. I get that. But when you look at some of these rankings with that added context, they just don't make sense sometimes. I really do think the rankings should be more volatile, but anyways, so it's not his style. And the 0 UFC finishes, it's also the inactivity. How is the UFC going to put you in a position to be champion? They won't. Champions that fight once a year, nobody wants that. So, but if he loses, I can see him fall down the rankings more than you might expect because of the stigma with the wrestlers, this sort of new era of the UFC that is not rewarding wrestlers because, they tend to be less action packed than your typical striker. And I mean, if he loses, he's probably never getting a title shot. So this kind of is a last stand for Movsar. If he can get that decision win, maybe he doesn't get the title shot, but he could still keep winning. And, eventually they are going to have to give it to him. Anyways, that's all I got. Let me know what you think in the comments. Who do you have in this fight and who do you want Volk to fight next? Drop a sub to the channel. Drop a like on the video. If you like this video, check some of my other videos out. Thank you so much. Talk to you later. Bye.